May God be in our head and our hearts and our understanding. Amen.
Amen.
So yes, I am going to touch on the gospel. But since we all may be stuck right there with what we've always thought about it, I want to make a few comments before I actually preach on what I believe Jesus is actually doing. And the comments are, well, the title of my sermon, I'll give you that to begin with today. It's called The Lens of Love. Maybe it's because I've been fooling around with lenses and trying to see and realizing how much different lenses and distortions and things like that can change what you see, and what you see gets changed, it changes how you do. So we're going to be looking at Jesus trying to get us to call through the lens of love. And our temptation is to, instead of looking through the lens of love, to try to make what Jesus said law. Because that's what we tend to do. And that's kind of what my sermon is about, is how we tend to try to legislate love. And that Jesus is trying to get us off of that. So what we don't want to do is to take the hyperbole that Jesus offers in this on purpose. And he was fond of Jesus, to take something to like, if you're going to believe in law, okay, well, if you're going to believe in law, then let's go all the way down, and what would it look like to really try to make love a law? Well, it would look like this. Well, isn't that ridiculous? Okay, so we need to keep that in mind and not get stuck there, just thinking that what Jesus was giving was another set of laws. Because he was talking about something more important. He was talking about looking through the lens of love. Bishop Michael Curry loves to talk about love. When he was writing his book that's called Love is the Way, he was writing it about 2019. It was published in 2020. But while he was writing it, he was also on the road a good bit, preaching, giving talks in various places. And as is always the case, his sermons always come back to love. In fact, Bishop Curry has often been known to say, if it ain't about love, it ain't about God. If it ain't about love, it ain't about God. So if you're reading something in the Bible and it doesn't seem to be about love, then realize that perhaps that was the way the people who wrote that down saw it. But if it ain't about love, it ain't about God. As you might expect, every time he spoke someplace, in the week following, he would get tons of emails with questions. Questions like some of these, which he put a few of them in his introduction to the book, which he wrote last, of course, because that's what you do with an introduction. But he would get questions like these. What is love? Can love really change the world? Won't loving everybody make me a doormat? I'm just a regular person. So how can my love have any impact? And so on. He wrote more, and there were more written to him, but you get an idea. These are just a few of the questions that Bishop Curry mentions in the introduction to his book. But I found that questions like these frequently come up when we talk about love as being the most important action to consider when we think of how we live and move and have our being in the world. When we talk about love, especially when we talk about loving God and loving each other, loving the entirety of creation, when we begin to talk about that kind of extravagant love, people tend to want to pin it down. What they want to do is pin that love down to something that they might be able to manage. And that's what happened with the people of Israel as generation after generation struggled through the Exodus, in which this passage from Deuteronomy was set, but not when it was written. It was probably written beginning when they were in exile. So they'd already gone through a lot of different things. But generation after generation struggled with that idea of how to stay within the covenant of love. They struggled with it through the Exodus, and that's why people remembered what Moses had told them and how Moses had given the Ten Commandments, which of course they would not call the Ten Commandments, but had given that part of the law to try to help them see some ways of loving each other in community. They continue to struggle with it through the settlement in the Promised Land. They continue to struggle with it through the rise and fall of monarchies in Judah and in the northern nation of Israel. They continue to struggle with it through exile, and they continue to struggle with it when they finally returned to their homes under foreign domination. So our reading of Deuteronomy reflects this ongoing struggle. The struggle to live in a covenant that invites people to choose life over death, to choose a loving relationship with God and others and all creation, rather than a self-serving way of life, which in the end usually leads to some kind of death. If we move then several centuries ahead in time, from any of those time periods where people would have been reading and struggling with the words of that book in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, if we move centuries ahead to the time of Jesus, a time reflected in this morning's gospel reading, it becomes obvious that the people who desired to be faithful to the covenant of love were still struggling. And in a desire to live within that covenant, they and their ancestors before them, they were continuing to try to establish laws to be obeyed, to pin down exactly what that covenant required, to pin down exactly what it was they needed to do to stay within that covenant of loving God and neighbor. But here's the thing about trying to legislate love. You can't do it. You can't legislate love. You can't ensure that people will follow a way of love by giving them what really amounts to a way of law. The laws themselves may be good laws. They may remain good laws, or they may start out good laws and then get distorted the more people try to pin them down to what they think is the right way to be loving. But regardless, laws, no matter how good they are, fall far short of what it really takes to choose to live life based on an ever-expanding love of God and others and all creation. To love this way requires us to find a way of looking at life through the lens of love. Not just following a law, but looking at every aspect of life through the lens of love. And that then brings us back to Matthew's gospel this morning, in which Jesus gives a commentary on this tendency we have to turn the way of love into a way of law. Each saying begins, "You have heard it said," and what they have heard, what they have been taught, is not only the 10 Commandments that we also learned and were taught, but all the different ways that they had tried to pin down that covenant through the ages with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of law. Now, an image came to me here, and I took it out of my sermon. I'm going to put it back in right now, because I can't see you guys anyway. I can see my paper, but when I look out distant, I can't tell what you're looking like. So, what immediately came to me when I thought about this was a traffic light. And you know that the intent of the traffic light, the lens through which we should look at traffic lights and things like that, is a lens of safety, a desire to provide safety for people traveling on the road, for a traffic light at an intersection. And the caution light is intended, at least the way I was taught, when you saw it, you were supposed to try to slow down and come to a stop, so that it gave time for that little lag between people coming up. But you know what people do. You've probably done it too. So have I. You see that yellow light, what do? You speed up. You try to see if you can beat that law. And so in the beating of the law, you sometimes lose the safety, don't you? Because sometimes you don't beat the law. Because not even a law, it can give you some minimum requirements for safety. But you've got to look through the fact as you approach the intersection, not that you want to beat the light because you're in a hurry, but that you want everybody to be well going through that intersection. You want the well-being of all. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's not refuting the laws themselves. He's refuting the process that generations have put in place more out of fear than love. He's refuting the process of trying to legislate love and looking instead through a lens just of law that you might be able to get around. To look at life through the lens of love is more than just a one-time choice. It's a moment-by-moment choice. Because in each moment of our lives, we have the opportunity to respond to whatever is happening at that moment from the perspective of a self-giving love that seeks the well-being of all who are involved in that moment with us. The kind of self-giving love that has to be offered intentionally. It doesn't always come naturally to us. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times we have to stop and think about it. The kind of love that intentionally says and does or refrains from saying and doing what is really needful for all the people and all of the creation and all of the presence involved at that moment in time. So yes, that means, we have a choice. When we're in the middle of an argument with somebody, we have a choice if we are aware of it. And always, this is everything, the person who first becomes aware that they've got a choice is the one that's most responsible to act at that point. We have a choice if we're in the middle of an argument that has gotten past just arguing the issues to something that is becoming damaging to the relationship and to each other. We have the choice to stand down. To stand down through a lens of love that says, I may still believe I'm right, but this isn't the way for us to work this out, and to let it be. The other side of that is to know when it's time to stand up, and to know how to stand up. See, the lens of love, I can't tell you a list of laws that you need to follow to do that. It's just that if we get used to looking through a lens of a love that's willing to give of ourselves in some way that we think will lead to the well-being of all, not that we'll win for our side, but that we think will lead to the well-being of all. This kind of love is not based on laws, it's based on core values. And I was really pleased to see when I was putting together this Black History Month bulletin and was featuring Battlefield Farms. I was really pleased to see the core values that Chris Battle put on that page, because I think they form a pretty good lens, not the only lens, okay, but a pretty good lens through which we can practice looking through love at the moments we have opportunities to choose love in our lives. He uses 3 words. He uses the Hebrew word shalom, which, as he explains there, means more than just the absence of conflict, but means that total well-being of all. We are in shalom when we are in harmony with God, with ourselves, with each other, and with the whole of the universe. It is a cosmic shalom. It is a cosmic well-being. And so part of looking through the lens of love is looking through the lens of shalom for the vision of God, of that kind of harmony. The other word he lists as a core value is agape, the Greek term that, as he explains it here, speaks to the highest form of love. He says it's the unconditional love that the Creator has for the creation and all that's in it. And that is true. But lately I have found other things to be more helpful in understanding agape. And some of the creation spirituality that I read of Matthew Fox years and years ago in seminary, he touched on it. He touched on it as that harmony of well-being. And most recently, the professor in the course that I'm taking, Thomas J. Ward, also touches on the fact that agape, love, is not just reserved for God. Agape is for all of us, that we're all called to agape. And agape, that the part of that, even if we are looking at affection or romantic love or whatever, if it's love, it will still show some signs of agape. It will still show signs of agape. And so, if shalom is the vision of God for the harmony of everything, then agape is the way God is invited to work with us in getting to that vision. It's not a vision that God will just decide at some point to accomplish by fiat. It is the vision that is constantly being worked out by God with us and with all of creation as well. So we have shalom, the vision. We have agape, the process, the means by which we get to that vision. And then Chris gives us an African word, ubuntu. Literally meaning a person is a person through other people. I read what he writes here, what Chris writes. It's the idea that community is the basing building block of society. As one houseless couple wrote about the farm, we often find ourselves at the farm in one of the few places where we are not asked to leave. You know, folks, that's what I heard here pre-pandemic when we were able to have the cafe. And people from neighborhoods, people that sometimes were living under the bridge, all sorts of people who came to the food pantry, but then were invited inside here and were able to have breakfast and spend as much time as they wanted here until we closed at noon. That's what several of them said to me, that those same words, that they were used to being asked to leave. And it was so wonderful to find a place that didn't ask them to leave, but instead asked them to come in and be welcome. So shalom is the vision, and agape is how we are to work with God in that vision. Ubuntu, our own specific communities, whether it's the community of our household, the community of our geographical neighborhood, the community of our colleagues, the community of our church, whatever community, and we have lots of them. Ubuntu is the place where we are in some kind of community, and that is the place where God would like to see us start practicing agape in a way that leads to the harmony of the well-being of all. Because if we can't even do it in those little communities, how in the world would we expect to see the world do it in the world? It starts one little place at a time. So I invite you to take those three words, take that home with you, maybe put it someplace where you can find it. And in a metaphorical way, write those three words on your heart. Fix their meanings in your mind, because together they do form a lens, one lens of love, through which we can look at our choices each time we encounter the opportunity to love. Maybe today is a good time to polish up our limbs a little bit. Maybe today is a good time to not just wait for those opportunities, but to look for them. So may we open our hearts and minds to the presence of God with us as we practice looking at life with the lens of love. May it be so. Amen. Amen. And I'll just say that there's something very freeing about being able to see your reactions. Let's take a moment.